In this video, I want to take you along on my little experiments with neodymium magnets. As you may know, I've built several instruments that rely on these surprisingly powerful small magnets. I regularly get questions along the lines of, couldn't you just do it like this instead? Often followed by magnet suggestions that, in my opinion, are not always fully thought through, that made it clear to me that many of the properties of these magnets are still not entirely understood. Hopefully, after this video, both their behavior and their proper use in real applications will be a bit clearer, and fewer magnets will be asked to do things they were never meant to survive. But even I will attempt a few things in this video that seem impossible at first glance, such as making cube magnets that really should not be able to exist. Put them together, and they attract each other from every side, no matter how you turn them. I will also show how to increase the holding force of magnets by more than a factor of 10, and how to make extremely strong magnetic assemblies that are about 20 times cheaper than you would expect. Physics may raise an eyebrow or two, but I promise it will all remain on speaking terms with reality. Neodymium, alloyed with a few other elements, is used to make the strongest permanent magnets we know. This year marks exactly 100 years since the rare earth metal neodymium was first isolated in its pure form. The fact that this happened only relatively recently has a reason. Neodymium does not occur in nature in a free metallic state. And that brings us to a second, slightly less noble property of these magnets. The alloy rusts with great enthusiasm. Given half a chance, it will happily turn back into chemistry. That is why neodymium magnets are almost always given a protective jacket, usually copper and nickel, to keep the oxygen in the air firmly on the outside where it belongs. So, never scratch that protective coating. Not that it would help anyway, because neodymium itself is extremely hard and spectacularly brittle. A thin magnet can crack if you so much as look at it the wrong way. Do not drill it, mill it, grind it, or otherwise get creative with it. Just leave it alone. Another rather unpleasant property is the low Curie temperature. Anyone who has watched blacksmithing videos knows the trick. You hold a magnet near glowing steel to see whether it is hot enough. Above about 770 degrees Celsius, steel changes its crystal structure and can no longer be magnetized. Unfortunately, for neodymium that threshold is around 80 degrees Celsius. Heat it beyond that, and it never truly recovers. The magnetism is simply gone. Yes, there are some neodymium grades that tolerate temperatures higher than 80 degrees, but without exception, they are weaker, more expensive, or both. This 80-degree variant is designated with the letter An, and it comes in several grades, starting from N35, the weakest of the bunch, up to N52, the strongest and, unsurprisingly, the priciest. These magnets come in every shape and size you can imagine: cubes, balls, rods, discs, plates, cylinders, you name it. From the ultra-cheap, wafer-thin discs that barely hold your kids' doodles on the fridge, to the ridiculously pricey, heavyweight beasts that could probably pull a small car. And now, if I tell you that, with just a few of those bargain bin fridge magnets and a touch of metalworking, you can make a magnet far stronger than one of those €100 monster bricks. Well, are you paying attention yet? Some of you may have noticed this in my previous video. I glued 4 rather puny little magnets to the side of my control box. And when I brought that box anywhere near the steel baseplate, you heard quite a smack. Mind you, these are just N35 disc magnets, only 1 millimeter thick. Yet they sounded like they were on steroids. And that has everything to do with a well-known law of nature, the inverse square law. It tells us that the strength of an electromagnetic field, light or magnetism, decreases with the square of the distance. Twice as far away means only a quarter of the intensity. 3 times the distance and you are left with just 1/9. In other words, it drops off very fast indeed. On the left, you see a small sketch of a neodymium rod magnet. Imagine it standing upright, stuck to a thick steel plate, with a holding force of just over 14 kg force. In column 2, I have sliced this rod into 20 discs, each 1 mm thick. In column 3, I calculate, for each individual slice, how much holding force it contributes at its particular distance from the steel plate. Column 4 shows what percentage of the total force each slice is responsible for. And finally, in column 5, you can see what the total holding force would be if the rod were shorter than 20 mm. What immediately stands out is that the bottom slice of the magnet, just 1 mm thick, is responsible for almost 12 of the more than 14 kilograms of holding force, well over 80%. The slice above it adds another 10% or so, the next one barely 3%, and after that, any extra length of the rod contributes almost nothing at all to the holding force. In other words, for maximum efficiency, flatter magnets are better. Anything beyond that is mostly just extra material costing money, but doing nothing useful when it comes to holding power. But before the real battle-hardened magnet experts chase me through the comments and carry me off covered in tar and feathers, yes, this is not the whole story. There is more at play than just the inverse square law when it comes to magnetic force versus distance. See this graph. That said, as a rule of thumb, it works well enough, and it keeps the explanation mercifully simple. So, we can see that a flat disk is an excellent starting point if you want the strongest possible magnet. And we can take it one step further by putting that disk magnet into a steel cup. Here is why such a potted magnet outperforms an open magnet by more than a magnitude. A flat magnet on its own spreads much of its magnetic field into the air, where it is largely wasted. A pot magnet surrounds the magnet with steel, which guides and concentrates the magnetic field toward the contact surface. Because more of the magnetic field is focused in one place, the holding force is much stronger, even though the magnet itself is the same. Let's measure that first. Here I have a flat magnet, 15 mm in diameter and just 1 mm thick. To keep the measurement honest, I glued it to a small piece of plastic. The lead ball sits on a little scale, and I try to lift it using the magnet. The maximum force turns out to be just over half a kilo. Not bad for something that thin, but let's just say it's not exactly Hercules yet. I've made a simple steel pot for it. The little magnet fits neatly inside. Around the magnet, there is a gap of 0.15 mm, and the flat bottom sites 0.05 of a millimeter below the magnet thickness, so the magnet is safely tucked away in its recess. Now let's see how much pulling force we get with this setup. And that turns out to be well over 7.5 kilograms, more than 15 times what the bare, unpotted magnet could manage. The magnet itself weighs just 1.33 grams. So this tiny sliver can lift almost 6,000 times its own weight. Off camera, after a bit of careful surface grinding on the pot, I even pushed it well past 8 kilograms of pulling force. Yes, I think this tiny fellow now earns the title Small Hercules. Let's briefly return to that magnet rated for 150 kilo, with a price tag of about 150 euros. So €1 for 1 kilo. Now imagine a chunky steel plate, 10 by 10 centimeters, neatly machined with 36 recesses for potting 36 of these little Herculean magnets. For roughly €7 worth of magnets, plus a similar amount for the steel and a generous donation of elbow grease, you end up with a magnet block that costs about 10% of that expensive brick and can hold a rather cheeky 300 kilo. Now it's €1 for 20 kilo. And is there a drawback? Of course there is. There always is. The reach of such a very thin disc magnet is shorter than that of a thick one. Take a look at this graph. At 0 mm distance, the pulling force is almost the same, but at just 2 mm distance, the 15 mm tall magnet is already about 6 times stronger. Whether that is a disadvantage depends entirely on what you want to achieve. If sheer holding force is the goal, then it is not a problem at all, quite the opposite. Magnet blocks made this way only really come alive at very short distances, and that is exactly where they are meant to work. Here the magnets snap together from a distance. With the thin disc magnets, things are much calmer, and your fingers get to stay where they belong. But before you start dreaming about ultra-thin neodymium magnets the size of a manhole cover, lifting many tons, sorry, that is not going to happen. This graph makes it painfully clear. Mother Nature has written it into the laws of magnetism that for 1 mm thick discs, there is a Goldilocks zone of roughly 5 to 40 mm diameter. Above that, the holding force only increases more or less in proportion to the diameter, while you still pay per surface area. In short, physics says nice idea, then quietly shakes its head. Okay, for someone who really dislikes videos that are compulsively talked to death from start to finish, I have committed a serious sin so far. But I do have an excuse. There was quite a lot to explain. Now let's turn those freshly gained insights into something useful and finally convert some steel into chips and, hopefully, a useful leftover. One of the little helpers I like to use in my small workshop are magnetic cubes. I am not entirely sure what the correct name is for them. Stefan Gotteswinter calls them tool room magnets, which sounds sensible enough, so I am borrowing that term from him. I already have a few, but they are neither very powerful nor particularly accurate. There is also a small dilemma involved. You want these blocks to be hard and wear resistant, but for the strongest magnetic field, you actually want the softest possible steel. I think I have found a good solution, and I hope to end up with magnetic blocks that are hard and wear resistant, yet still have a high holding force. I will make 4 blocks per set, and 3 sets in increasing sizes, all made from ST37 steel. I start with the smallest blocks. These are mainly useful as helpers in measurement setups. To get all dimensions accurately identical, I make an aluminium jig for the lathe. Each set has 24 faces that need precise machining, and this little helper allows me to do that quickly and without losing my sanity. This is a typical application for these tool room magnets. They let you set up a measurement quickly, accurately, and with excellent stability. Here I am measuring the accuracy of a large spirit-level vial. Things are moving along nicely, but there is still plenty left to do. In the next video, I will finish this little project and show a few more examples of how these handy helpers can be used. If you want to calculate for yourself how strong a neodymium magnet really is, and read a lot more useful information besides, I can highly recommend the KJ Magnetics website. Link in the description. See you in the next video.